Welcome to Hang. This is the Should I Stay or Should I Go panel. This panel examines, to be successful as an artist, do you need to leave Scotland and come down to London in order to make it? I'm joined by three esteemed colleagues from the music industry who have all had success in different types of ways. And we're going to discuss that question during the course of this panel and hopefully find an answer that works for you that's tuned in. My name is Ben Wynter. I work for AIM, the Association of Independent Music, where we support independent rights holders. I also run a company called Unstoppable Music Group, which is a management, production, and publishing company. And we look after producers, songwriters, artists. And I've been in the music industry for 20 years. I'm gonna leave these amazing people to introduce themselves and tell them a little bit about who they are. I'm gonna go around the screen clockwise as I see it. So I will start with Lotos. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me today, Ben. This is amazing. I really respect what Salma's is about. I am part of the crew Lotos, last of the old school. I am a writer and I've written for a number of quite well-known artists. I've been making music in Scotland for around about 15, 20 years. First unsigned act to be recognised by the Mobos, to play Glastonbury and toured across the US, EU and the UK, the number of artists. So that's me.
Wow, so you've not done much then. Andy, please introduce yourself.
My name's Andy. I run an artist services company called Supernature. I'm also the manager of a handful of acts, including AJ Tracey, conductor, and Sega Bodega. The reason that I'm involved in this panel is not because I'm Scottish, as you can tell from the accent, but I spent 10 years from my early 20s living in Bristol, being a part of a very strong local music community in that city, and sort of cutting my teeth and finding my way into the music business through that route, and then eventually relocating to London a few years ago to continue my journey. That's me.
Great stuff. Thank you, Andy. And Eve, please introduce.
Hey guys, I'm Eve. I'm A&R director at AWAL, it's a distribution company. I'm from Edinburgh. You can tell from my accents, that's why I'm on the panel. So I've got a lot to say about that move from Scotland to London, or not that move. I started my career at Cobalt Publishing, where I worked with artists like Chronix and Coffee, Mahalia, and then recently moved across to AWAL on the recording side. So that's me.
Excellent, thanks for that. Right, we're going to get straight into it, and we're going to get into a couple of questions, starting with what is everybody's current relationship with Scotland? What's your experience has been like working across Scotland and England? Feel free, whoever wants to start. I can see Andy being a gent.
I feel like I shouldn't go first. I have things to say. I feel like not being Scottish, I should wait.
I can jump in.
Go on, go ahead.
Yeah, I was born in Edinburgh. I moved to London for uni. It wasn't at that point, the move was because the course I wanted to do in music production, there wasn't the opportunities at that point in time for me in Edinburgh. And I found out about a course down here that I wanted to do, and that was sort of the reason for the move. And then since then, my relationship with being back in Scotland has just been trying to be there as much as possible, work-wise, like any opportunity in the past, like out of town shows, artists that are coming up within Scotland, I've always been straight there and really wanting to be part of the scene there. So yeah, that's kind of been my relationship, sort of remote one, but trying to be in the scene as much as possible.
Okay.
I think for me, I started traveling to London around about 15 years old, just because the scene in Scotland, there was some groups when I was quite young. There was only really like Two Tone Records, maybe Capital 1212, Black and Eyes, AJ. So I used to travel a lot from Edinburgh, and I used to go to places like Deal Real Records on Carnaby Street. So I'd go there, I'd perform. I met and toured with a lot of artists, everyone from Black Twang to MCD, Jess, Kalashnikov, Harry and Sarah Love. Joined a band called Banana Clan with Roots Maneuver, Young Gun, Tommy Evans, Xavier, Kano, Wiley, Skepta. They were a lot of the artists. They were all senior to me at that time, but I used to go down, battle, used to do a lot of pirate radio, like Rinse at that time. So I really saw the scene developing, and I think a lot of the issues that we experience in Scotland are exactly the same at that time for the UK artists, because in terms of hip hop, we've always had over surplus of talent, I would say. You know, a lot of the rappers back then to me were beyond exceptional, but they were very, very conscious. It was very much something that was owned by the people, and it wasn't particularly commercial or popular. So I started bringing a lot of artists to Scotland at that time, especially up until about the age of 19. We ran a lot of underground hip hop nights up here at Liquid Rooms and Cab Ball and the Old Bongo Club. So I think that there's a lot of major differences between Scotland and England, although I do think that now is obviously like a completely different place. I feel over the last sort of 5-7 years, there has been more of a push for diversity. So having artists and rappers from different parts of the UK, not just focusing on London artists. And we've seen in the last 2 years, more artists coming through from Scotland as well in terms of rap and hip hop. So I think that's kind of what I've witnessed or experienced.
Okay.
The all I have to say, well, the main thing I have to say on this is that early in my kind of journey in the music business, I put on monthly events in Bristol, and I ran a record label in Bristol also. And probably the biggest influence for me in that sort of era was a couple of labels based in Glasgow. One was called Numbers, one's called Lucky Me. They both still operate, but there was a sense of community with the way that those labels were run that I found hugely inspiring. And those two labels, both in the way that they released records and marketed records, but also the way that they did their own events, was really inspiring to me. And on a few occasions, I would go up to Glasgow and sort of go to their events and just kind of soak it in. And I just got a real sense that the music community in Glasgow especially was like nothing I've seen anywhere else in the UK until that point or since. There's such a close-knit creative community. And it's exceptional. And I think that, you know, I guess we'll get onto these topics later, but that strength of like geographical community is something that is really important for kind of incubating original sounds and new concepts creatively. And yeah, that's my professional sort of relationship with Scotland at this point, is mostly centered on that.
Sorry, I was still muted. Okay, cool. So that kind of brings nicely on to networks, and you know, if you're coming from a regional or national place, how do you go about building your networks? You know, is it important to build a local network? Do you need to build a network outside of the locality, as in outside of the city that you're in or the nation that you're in? How important are networks? How do you go about building those networks, and what's been your experience in growing those networks?
I think for me as an artist, when I first started out making hip hop music, it just wasn't, people didn't see it as viable to be a Scottish rapper. It was kind of something that people in England looked down on, or they just couldn't take it seriously. I don't think that's specific to music though. It was exactly the same in any industry. It could be media, it could be broadcasting. It was just kind of the stereotype. And I think as well, because I was Black, people just, I mean, I'd come to London and they'd be like, "Rah, you're from Scotland and you're Black, like really? Like they got Black people in Scotland?" I'll be like, "Yes, they do have Black people in Scotland." And they still do that. I thought it was really funny on, I won't say the name of the show, there's a rap show that started, and the two guys that were on it had made a comment like, "Oh, I didn't know they had like rappers or Black people in Scotland." And I thought that was funny because when I had first been on One Extra like 10, 15 years ago, then it was like Tim Westwood and stuff. It was exactly the same thing that was kind of being said. And I do find that remarkable because you do have, you know, loads of bands coming out of Scotland, like Young Fathers, like One Mercury's, you know, really established, well-known groups, Black groups across genres coming out of Scotland. So I never really understood how to, I suppose, there was not really anything I could do to negotiate that or change that opinion. So for me personally as an artist, I started touring in the US and Europe before, I mean, I toured the whole of the UK, but it was very much on the underground with people like Klashnikov and Skinny Man. But I decided to work more in the States because I felt people responded better to me. They liked my accent. They didn't have any kind of ideologies or stereotypes of how I should be. So I also gravitated more towards a sort of conscious artist. So then I was touring with people like The Roots and Talib Kweli and Mos Def and so on. And then I kind of came back to the UK scene. But again, because the music industry is so kind of London-centric, like a lot of things in general, it's not the music industry, it's the government, it's all of these other things. It was still very much, it was almost like impossible in a way to be taken seriously, even though the quality of the music was so good. And we're touring with people like Nas and Damian Marley, you know, really big names. But it was easier to get booked through a US booking agent or a European booking agent than to get booked in the UK. So I found that really, really difficult. There wasn't much I could do to negotiate that. But I think in general, particularly as a woman of color, there seems to be a huge issue with how to market and represent Black female artists in the UK, regardless of the genre. We seem to be quite missing. In my lifetime, when I look at music, you know, some of the biggest Black female artists coming through are, you know, coming through on the commercial scene with people like Simon Cowell, Alexandra Burke, Leona Lewis, etc., etc. We've only really had, you know, these really hard-working artists like Lady LaSure and Little Sims, who've just been like tirelessly 15 years in the game, just like working, trying to punch through, which is a shame. I think as well that in the UK, it's really difficult to just be an artist as a female in hip hop. If you're not really into sexualizing yourself and you're not going to package yourself in a way that is the kind of norm, which I think a lot of the way we take our presentation is influenced by United States of America, particularly when it comes to representations of women. So I've always been someone that's always been like talent first, look second. Like I totally believe in that. I don't think there's anything wrong with using your sexuality or your body, but for me as an artist, like I want to be judged on my music. I don't want somebody to book me because of the way that I look. And that also was a big issue because I wasn't willing to do certain things. But I don't want to over dominate the conversation, so feel free to jump in at any point in time.
Eve, I was gonna ask Eve, because you made a point about like Little Sims, and obviously integral to Little Sims's career, and you know, in terms of your own career as an A&R, coming down from Scotland and being an A&R in London, and also being a Black female A&R, as was mentioned by Lotus. How do you go about working with artists, making sure that there's visibility, and also, you know, ensuring that outside of Scotland or from whichever region or nation, as an artist, you know, you're getting that attention, you're building that fan base. As Lotus said, she went via America and came back. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, firstly, Lotus, everything you said, I resonate with, like absolutely everything. And it's something that I've always been really conscious of in the A&R space to try and combat against. I think when I started out in the industry, I was like 19. So there was a lot of conversations where I think I was quite naive to, I think, biases that people have within the industry about where, especially women of color and Black women, sit and are marketed and are packaged. And I look back on a lot of those conversations. I think now I'm in a position, in a place where I really make sure to challenge everything and really think like, you know, when we're in an A&R meeting and we're listening to 3 different artists, and you kind of hear how there's some artists come through and it's like everyone just has a real clear direction of their trajectory and their route. And then there might be another artist that comes through, very often, I think, women of color, where people seem a bit like, oh, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure like where they sit because, you know, they're not in a certain scene. I don't know, there's just always sort of more question marks around it. And that's something I've really been trying to challenge throughout my career. I think going back to a point you said, Lotus, quite early on, where I think that there's certain cities in the UK which are very much associated with certain genres, which then becomes a problem if you make an artist in that city making a genre that people don't automatically assume is from that. And I think I kind of hope that that's changing, but I know what you mean when you said about people being surprised that you're Scottish and you're a rapper, because people, I think, do still very much associate rap with London. And I think it's changing slightly and becoming a bit less territory focused. And I think there's a responsibility in the industry to sort of make sure we don't hold biases just by where someone's from or the city that they're in. I weirdly hope that the fact that rap's becoming a bit more regional, less London focused, you know, rappers coming out of Manchester, out of Liverpool, out of like Ireland as well, like it's kind of making it feel a bit less London centric. But as a Scottish woman myself, I definitely think there's more that needs to be more visibility of the hip hop and rap and R&B scene in Scotland. It's not just, you know, electronic music and indie, which I think is still a lot of people's assumptions about the scene up there.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think that's where that comes from. But I am hopeful that just over the past few years, I've seen some of those biases kind of drift away in certain conversations I've been part of. And that's why it's so great that we're having a conversation like today, because it's all about visibility, especially if you're an artist in a scene where people don't always assume that you're from.
Yeah, I'm quite up for hearing what Andy's got to say. I suppose I'll just add to that as well, is I think as well, it's like anything, like we've had this whole year of all these, it's been so tumultuous. We've had the protests, George Floyd, all of these things going on. And I think it is important to stress that a lot of the issues that we have in the music industry are a microcosm of what's going on within greater society. So nothing I'm saying is specifically directed at the music industry itself. It's more just, these are kind of like the issues that we need to negotiate and we need to deal with. And I think one thing that A&Rs, people who organize events, even like this, people who give awards, people on the radio have to be really careful of. And you can see this happening right now in the Scottish music scene. And what's happening is you'll have like the most commercial DJ, so somebody who isn't necessarily engrossed in the true scene of what's happening in Scotland, but because they've got good connections in London, or they've brought up a lot of artists from London over the years, what will happen is that London DJ or whoever will go to that commercial DJ and say, who do you think we should put on this bill? And that is a mistake, because what's happening now in Scotland is a lot of the people who are being, I suppose, you know, and this is no shade, this is just trying to understand where the scene's going, are people who maybe don't even understand much of the scene. A lot of the artists that are really coming through right now have maybe only been rapping for a really short period of time, maybe only 2 or 3 years. And, you know, instead of having someone like Richie Roughtone, so if people did a bit more research, who's a 3 times DMC champion winner, who understands the scene, who's traveled the world, asking someone like them to create a space for 1Extra, they'll just choose the first person or the person they see that's like big on social media, as opposed to doing a bit more research and really identifying who are the people. And that's why, even though there's just as many female artists right now in hip hop in Scotland, you're still seeing entirely male showcases. And that's a combination of the person who's curating it not having enough experience, not having enough links or good relationships, and being, you know.
I'm gonna cut you there, because you made a point, and I want Andy to jump in on this. And you know, for myself, I came to Scotland probably 2 years ago, wasn't really aware of a hip hop scene in Scotland until I spoke at an event, and 3 guys were like, "Yo, we want to show you the scene in Glasgow." And I did not sleep that night, because they took me to events, to the studio, and I went.
Sounds like Glasgow to me.
It was the illest night, right? And ever since I've been like, I'm pushing for Scotland because this is dope. Now, if somebody had said to me before that, what's popping in Scotland, I would have gone online and I probably would have seen certain artists. Now, is that down to me, or is that down to the community and the artists and the people within the scene to create that themselves, to create visibility for themselves? Andy, how do you do that? How do you go about doing that? You said that there were 2 labels that you're aware of early on, and they didn't make the job. And
I'm gonna. I mean, first of all, I think that every individual artist's journey of growth is very much tied into their affiliations and the people that they work with, associate with, and the audience they build from ground level. And I think that what happens in places like Glasgow, places like Bristol's a good example, Manchester's a great example as well, in these cities that have got a really strong local creative community, artists are able to get their first step on the ladder because there's almost like a pre-built home audience to kind of tap into. You can get yourself involved at ground level in sort of creative endeavors, and you know, depending on how much work you want to put in, how sort of determined you are to keep climbing that ladder, you can take a few more steps along your process without needing to even look outside of, you know, the boundaries of your city that you're in. I think that artists that have managed to build success at home reach a point where they start thinking, all right, well, I've kind of done what I can do at home. Now I want to branch out. And this comes to your point now. And it's like, how do you then bridge that gap? And a challenge that a lot of artists that have built a strong local following face is that the point at which they decide they want to branch out and appeal to other cities in the country, or even appeal outside of their home country, is that the home scene can be a bit funny about that. You can find that, and I've seen this firsthand at home in Bristol, and I know it happens in other places, you can get a little bit of a backlash from your home community once they see that you're trying to go and do something that doesn't necessarily involve them, and you see that quite a lot. But you know, back to the original point is that if you're building your artistry in one of these places that has a strong local scene, it really gives you that foot in the door from early on. It gives you early opportunities that you might not necessarily even get in a place like London, where the scene is so huge and sort of spread out. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but that's my experience from sort of you know, my early days working in music.
I think as well, as an artist, it's just, I think the thing that I did early in my career is I decided what I wanted to do and what my purpose was. So my purpose wasn't fame or to be recognized by the London people, or it was to make amazing music and to give the music to the people. So for me, rather than, I suppose, focusing on my promotion, I focus on making amazing music and giving it to people and getting booked for gigs. And I think there was a question you asked earlier, Ben, and I think that you don't now, right now, you don't need to travel anywhere to be a musician and to get your music out there. You can stay right at home and do your thing. But at the same time, I think one of the things that I would be concerned about with a lot of the new artists and new generations coming through is a lot of these artists have never done a live gig. I've never done it. I've never been on tour, right? So there's a lot of rappers right now in Scotland who've never even performed outside of their home city, but they might be getting serious traction online. And I think that, you know, that's the only thing that we do need to be careful with, I suppose, is to make sure that the artists are having the opportunity to tour, are getting enough experience, because music to me is not just about numbers or having like a huge profile. Some of the best bands, certainly in Scotland, if you go online, you won't find them. But if you ask someone, have you heard of Bomb Scare, The Big Hand, people have heard of them. So I think it goes both ways. I think that, as I said before, the A&Rs, the producers, people, it's like anything, you know, we could be talking about how do we get more diversity at the BBC. You can't just rely on the artist putting themselves in front of you. Sometimes if you genuinely want diversity, you have to look for it. Because it's not always going to be in the hiring pools that you're used to being able to go to. So you might be used to being able to just Google something and finding it. But that's not always necessarily conducive when you really want to have a diverse atmosphere and situation.
So for those that are watching, what would be you guys' advice on, as you mentioned, you know, getting the opportunity to tour, to getting yourself on radio? What would be the advice that you would give? Because I know a lot of the people watching are probably listening in and going, I understand what you're saying, but that's great. What's the solution to these things? How do I get onto radio? How do I get, you know, Tiffany Calver to play my record? How do I get on a show with AJ Tracey? Like, how do I do these things?
You have to, I think as an artist in this era right now, you have to look beyond the idea of, you know, being put on by somebody. You have to, I don't think it's healthy for your goal to be this well-known DJ is going to play me on radio. I think you've got to look inwards, and you've got to say, how do I build my tribe? How do I build my audience? Because once you start building an audience, Tiffany Calver has to play you, because she's going to look like she's not paying attention if she doesn't. You have to you have to find ways to create heat for yourself first. It can't be about how do I get someone to let me in the door. It's got to be how do I kick the door down. And I think that the way this again ties neatly into the topic of this conversation here is that local scenes can help you to get the first few steps on that ladder. I think it shouldn't be overlooked.
Definitely. I totally agree. I think also the power of local scenes feels even stronger at the moment than I think it ever has. And I think I'm seeing that from an A&R perspective of like, I feel much more aware of scene that's happening in Birmingham now than I was when I first came into the industry. And I think it's because there's management companies, there's labels, there's just people are building locally, which then makes me, even though I don't know the scene inside out in Birmingham, but it makes me be like, sick, there's something happening here, I want to know everything about it. And I've always had that pull towards Scotland, but I can imagine that if there's other A&Rs in the scene who might just be unaware of the scene up there, but as soon as you start to sort of hear about shows and a buzz locally, then it makes everyone sit up and pay attention. And I think also it's good because then for artists, you can make things more on your own terms as well. It's not about like coming to London and changing yourself to fit into a scene here that can be very localized and very about London. There's amazing artists that are just being true to themselves in their own city. And then there's opportunities that are coming to them rather than you feeling like you have to leave where you're from. And I feel like this year has been almost positive for local scenes because everyone's been a bit more at home and kind of there's been less travel, but I think actually there's been a real sort of thriving that's been able to happen because of that.
Well, I think more so than ever, certainly more so than any time that I've been working in the music business. You don't need London to buy into what you're doing to succeed in music. There's so many avenues to build a career and to, build an income as a musician that don't rely on you getting the cosign from London. There's many people that I kind of came up in this business with in Bristol, who are still there and they're very happy and they're making a good living. And they don't necessarily even have these wild ambitions to go global because they don't need to, because they're able to stay at home and make the art that they want to make and earn a living from it. And I think it all boils down to like, what are you in this for? Are you in it for the fame? Are you in it to be famous? Are you in it to be hot? Or are you in it because you love making art and you want to be able to support yourself from it? I think that's what it boils down to. Do you want the hype or do you want an actual career?
100%.
Build a career. You can build a career without all of these cosigns today.
Exactly. And I think as well for me, like I've been offered a few record deals, and when I really looked into the contracts, I just didn't feel like it was what I wanted. And I think that you do, as I said before, like as an artist, you have to decide what is it you're trying to do? What is your ultimate goal? Or do you want to be commercial? If so, then you will need to do these things. If your goal is just to make amazing music and make a living off it, then you don't need any of those DJs to play your music. Because for me, I've managed to make an income. I've charted many times, not in the UK charts, although I've charted in the UK charts as well, but more in Europe and in the reggae charts as well, collaborating with reggae artists. And that was basically because I became very disheartened as a Black female rapper in the UK. And it was just because I feel like when it comes to rap and hip hop, unless you're gonna spit like a man, like you will not be respected. Like you have to spit and behave in the conventional gendered role of a man, which I really don't agree with. And then there's no space for natural beauty. It's the representations of Black women. I have no issues with weaves or wigs, anything like that. That's great. But my mission is to promote self-love and natural beauty as much as possible. So I really didn't want to fall into that. So I went to Europe where I could just be myself and play the music I want to play to people that love it. And it's not, necessarily explicit or talking about how tough I am or about how fast I can rap. So I think as well, like not being so focused and identifying exactly what is you're trying to achieve is key to that. I think as well, It's really important to understand your environment and who your target market or the people it is you're trying to speak to as an artist. Coming from Edinburgh, I would say that Edinburgh, I love Glasgow, went to university, it's one of my favorite places in the world, but I would say that the Edinburgh scene in hip hop was much stronger than the Glaswegian scene when I was growing up. But because people focus on Glasgow the same way they focus on London, or England over Scotland, or China over Japan, that is often lost. And you see that a lot of the time, because you'll find a lot of Glasgow-based bands will kind of have a lot of opportunities just because they're closer to the action, to the media space, and to the media outlets. But then over here, there's these Scottish Edinburgh-based bands picking up massive, awards like Mercury's, who've never even been recognised in Glasgow. And that's because of the historical fracture between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And what tends to happen again is people coming from England, they will more likely gravitate to Glasgow because it's represented in a certain way. Whereas artists based in Edinburgh tend to be more marginalized and kind of looked over. Why is that important? It's important to understand, but not to be disheartened by, so that you as an artist can position yourself in a way that will lead to your success. I talk a lot about roadblocks and hurdles. So roadblocks are things that you cannot change. So I'm not going to change my race or my gender. It's not going to happen for me. But hurdles are maybe my location. Yeah, I can jump on a train. I can jump on this. I can go to these places. So as an artist, we're going to be constantly presented with obstacles, which we need to negotiate. And it's about identifying what's most important to you and also how to cope with those obstacles.
Agreed. Speaking of obstacles, so it's been brought to my attention that there is a idea at the moment coming from various sections of the Scottish hip hop community that in order to succeed, you need to assimilate yourself to sound like a rapper from London or from a different region. What's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on the importance of the accent? Is it important to make sure that you sound like those that are popping in the charts and making it happen? Or should you be just trying to sound like yourself, making sure that how you speak is how you're heard? When I came up in the game, everyone was trying to put on an American accent when they rapped, because that's what was happening. I'm really showing my age here. But, now it's great to hear English MCs, London MCs sounding like where they're from. But I've also been guilty of hearing a Northern accent in the past and being like, I want to hear that. So what's the Scottish person to do? Thoughts?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I hate the idea of someone changing their accent or trying to sound like they're from London. I think, but I understand in the past why that might have felt like something that was needed to be more palatable, perhaps. But yeah, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, I think that if there's strength in a local scene and you've got the backing and the engagement around you, then I don't feel like you need to sort of pander to London or what's sort of most palatable there. And yeah, that's kind of my hope for it, that there's no reason why an indie band or a rock band with the lead singer of a really strong Scottish accent should have any difference from a rapper coming through in the scene if they have an accent. And it seems like we've got a lot of examples in a lot of genres where it's not been something that has been difficult for people to get their ears around. So yeah, I would just say stay true and just build a following around you and in your territory first.
I mean, especially if we're talking about, rap and hip hop, like authenticity is so fundamental to hip hop. You can't be changing your accent. It's just that's nonsense. You can't do it.
It's true. Like what you guys are both saying is so true, but it's not reality. The artists, other than one, that are being pushed, that are being played on the radio by the London DJs, sound as close to English as possible, or they rhyme in a very specific London style, a rhyming pattern, even the cadence in their voice. And that's who is chosen. And again, as I said earlier, it's the producers, the DJs, the A&Rs. Those are the people who are in a position to ensure that there is authenticity. But unfortunately, whether we're looking at Jamaica or we're looking at the United States of America, difference between the East Coast and the West Coast, the way that Death Row dominated and your Puff Daddies and the commercial, what we're witnessing now in hip hop is, Kanye West and Jay-Z said that, hip hop is dead. And the reality is there's been this rolling out of what we refer to as deaf culture, meaning that the music and the content of the music is deaf, dumb, and blind. And the majority of the music that's really being pushed is very much focused on destitution, drugs, death. And that's always been a part of hip hop. Unfortunately, if DJs don't make a priority to ensure there's a diversity of music being played, so that's a combination of what's hot, what's popping, as well as conscious artists, as well as artists that are not about that life, then there's really nowhere to go. And I only know that because I work a lot with young people. And one of the things they kind of said to me when I played them other artists and other music is, wow, I didn't know this even existed, whether that's English artists or Scottish artists, that were not focused on sexualization, vanity, and so on. We can all see that this is the reality of hip hop. There's an argument that says, well, hypersexualization of women, it's their own bodies, they should do what they want. But I think over the last, especially 5-10 years, it's kind of like out of control. And unfortunately,
without meaning to cut you, but just staying on point in terms of the accent side of things, and what you're saying in terms of radio not playing, and going back to what you guys have said about building a community. If Manchester, for example, I was speaking to Michael Adex, H's manager, a couple of days ago, who is very much committed to growing the Manchester scene and making sure that the Northwest has a voice, has an accent, and has access. And it's very easy to put that on radio, but is it not, as you guys have already mentioned, about developing your scene? Is it not about growing your audience? Or because it's a confusing message that you guys are sending right now for the people watching.
I was just about to come back around, actually.
A little bit confused because
I was just about to come back around on what I was saying.
In this radio, so my thing is.
No, the reality is this, like, I'm an artist, I make music, right? I sell music, I get booked for gigs all the time. I have done, but end of the day, you're asking a specific question, and the reality is, like, the answer to your question is yes, you're more likely to have more success if you sound as close to English as possible. That's a fact. Doesn't matter if it's broadcasting, TV presenting, or music industry, because people are just not used to hearing different accents from across the UK. Now, it's not saying it's their fault. It's not their fault, the DJs and those people. It's just they're the people that are in a position to play different things to the audience. Then the audience gets used to different sounds. But all of us have to work hard. All of us have to build our scene. But the reality is, if you went online and searched, Scottish artists, you could have one artist who's got no online presence, but's had been charting, who's, done all these amazing things. So again, as I said before, it's really important for people when they're curating sets, when they're putting things together, to make sure that they really do their research.
I guess what I would say to that is we are fast moving into a place where the influence of radio DJs, the influence of, the major labels is dwindling. the power, you know, artists are not being broken by commercial radio DJs anymore. That's not where success is being created. It's being created before it reaches that point, I believe now. And so I think that a lot of these gatekeepers that you're talking about they don't have anywhere near the power they had even 5 years ago, let alone 10. There are, from my point of view, having developed a young black artist from London to the point where he's got 30 odd sales plaques, the roots to that success do not depend on the programming of radio producers like they certainly would have done 10-15 years ago. The whole, as far as I can see, the whole space is democratized. And when you're talking about the accents of rappers, I mean, you're seeing rappers from other regions of England, certainly H from Manchester, Bugsy Malone, Mist from Birmingham. You're seeing rappers from across England with noticeably different accents that are actually achieving success. And they're doing it because they build their local community at home first, and they build their community at home until it becomes so loud that us in London can hear it and see it and feel the energy from it. And then when they decide they want to come to London and maybe work with some artists from London, they've already got the brand is built and they've got the route to do it. So I think it's not, I wouldn't say it's as simple as you have to change your accent. I think things are changing fast, and I think that's positive, personally.
Eve, your thoughts?
You think, Eve?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's such a conflicting thing though, because look at everything you said about like the reality of it. I completely see that, and like that is still true. But it feels like just in the past couple of years, we are seeing a positive shift. And like what Andy said about radio being less of a gatekeeper, like I remember starting the industry and every conversation was about radio. And if radio didn't support something, then it was like game over. And now that's just not the conversation at all. Like it's exciting because it feels like there's more power to independent artists, more power to the teams the artists decide to put around them, rather than being sort of like, if I don't sign to a big label, big indie or a big major, then I can't get that exposure. And I think that mentality of having to get signed to become big is why people feel like they have to compromise and change themselves to fit into that mold of what looks like the artists that are getting signed. So I think we're entering into a slightly different stage where you can build a lot more independently, get the support and funding, doesn't have to be within the major system, which then I think gives more freedom to be yourself. And yeah, I hope that's not too much of an idealistic way to look at it, but I honestly have seen that change in the conversations of seeing the artists that are becoming big, but also seeing what artists want for themselves. And it seems less about, just signing to a major and moving down to London, and much more about staying true to where they're from and what they want to build around themselves and their community.
Yeah, I think staying authentic and achieving success on that path feels like it's more viable than it's ever been at this point. And you're seeing artists achieve success without compromising. You're seeing, especially in the UK sort of rap space, you're seeing artists achieve top tier commercial success without signing record deals. So there's no one telling those people you've got to change your accent, or you've got to do this or do that.
100%.
It's all down to how capable are you of building an audience using the tools at your disposal. It doesn't cost anything to use social media. It doesn't cost anything to, well, it costs a few quid to get your music on streaming services. That from my perspective is where fan bases are being built today. Things like getting it's rare that I personally see radio plays even moving the needle at all for the artists I work with. Individual radio plays don't move the needle. When you've got a song on every A-list of every commercial station in the country, yeah, that's going to make a difference. But spot plays, these DJs and curators, they're not the tastemakers anymore.
No, I agree as well. I just think a lot of the things I'm saying, it's not really for you guys, it's for people who are genuinely in these situations who it might not seem as optimistic to them, you know, because I think we're all really positive people, we're doing well in our careers. And but I think it's important as well to be like quite honest with people and to say these are obstacles you might come up against. That's not to put you off or to dissuade you. It's just the reality.
Yeah,
so like when you're talking, a lot of the artists you mentioned, the one thing they have in common is they're all men, right? And I think as a woman, I work with Black women specifically who suffer mental health issues age 7 up. And there's a lot of serious issues in particular in our community. And that's why it's important to me to articulate some of these concerns, because you know, if you're an artist and you're extremely talented and you're working hard and you're trying to build your local base, but it's not happening, it is important to understand there are all these other things going on in the wider social, economic, and political environment which might be contributing to why you are not as successful as you could be potentially. And that's not to put you off, that's to make you stronger. That's to make you be
prepared for the fight.
Yeah. How are you going to negotiate this? What can you do to make sure that your music punches through? Because a lot of the women I work with are Black female art musicians who are beyond talented and who have never had any opportunity for whatever reason. And I'm kind of like, you know, giving them certain advice, and I'm encouraging them to also look at different parts of the world if they can, using technology, using social media. Don't just focus on, you know, the UK specifically, because we're still maturing. There's still a long way to go. I respect your optimism and I agree with it. I 100% feel that, you know, many of the gatekeepers and so on are moving, but the reality is, even if I was going on Black, you know, platforms for artists, if you'd looked at those platforms 1.5 years ago, you'd see practically no women. And if you saw them, there's very specific looks and aesthetics. But post George Floyd, I have seen those platforms change dramatically. So it is great to appreciate that, but we shouldn't like brush over it as if it isn't an issue and you can just do this and things will work out fine. That's not. The music industry is a lot of work, right? Number one, it's huge work as an artist, it's huge commitment, and it's actually quite expensive as well. And I think it's important for people like us to be really honest about that and to be open about that so that people kind of understand, you know, that, you know, these kind of issues they have to negotiate.
Yeah, I think it's a big responsibility on the industry. I kind of hate to hear about the responsibility being just on the artist. It's a big responsibility on the industry to make sure that they're having conversations about the artists that are getting signed, labels looking at their roster, how many men on the roster, how many women on the roster, where are these artists from, like, do you just sign straight white men? You know, like all of these sort of conversations, which I think there's more that needs to be done on that side, because as soon as people are more honest about it, that's where we start to see that change, and that, I guess, that more intention of, okay, I'm not just gonna look at the same sort of avenues that I normally do. I'm gonna branch out and look to other scenes as well. So I think there's a big responsibility on the industry to switch things up a bit. I just wanted to mention a couple of, for anyone watching, a couple of great mentorship, especially for young Black women. There's an amazing mentorship called Creating Vision, which is London based, but a lot of it is remote. So there's like remote panels and remote, I guess, mentoring relationships as well. And there is another great one by the producer called Carla Marie, and I've completely just blanked the name, but I'm going to send it across and hopefully it can be shared on everyone. But she's an amazing producer and she is championing young girls coming into the scene, and it's very global. So yeah, I think it's a really great program. So I'm just going to find it now and I will send it to you, Ben.
I'm going to do a couple of shameless plugs as we're in that space. Obviously, as co-founder of Power Off, I'm going to direct people December, new cohort gets taken on. Whether you're female or male, please apply. There are Scottish artists on it this year, and Power Up is a movement to put an end to anti-Black behavior in the music industry. So please do apply to that. Also, there's some other great, amazing organizations such as She Said So that are doing amazing things around females. There's Key Change as well, which you can look into, which is pushing for 50-50 gender equality. So please do go online. I'm sure that Hang are pushing all of these as well to make sure that you're aware of what's out there for you. Please go and check them out, as well as the AIM, the brand new AIM associate membership, which is a free level of membership that you can access via your distributor. So any information that you need in order to help you get your releases out there, to push your releases, you can do that via the AIM associate membership. It's free. Do it via your distributor. You can get information on radio. You can get information on distribution, on setting up your label, setting up your company, all kinds of information to help you move forward as you progress. We're coming up to the last like 5-6 minutes of this. So I really want to get into some advice on, I was going to go into resources, but we've already tapped into those. But I really want to get into some advice from each of you on how you can build your audience, how you can build your tribe. I'm a big fan of the true fan theory. I know me and Andy have had many conversations about that. If you don't know what it is, go and Google it, the true fan theory. But please, let's get into this in what you can do if you're in Scotland to enhance your visibility and to push your career forward.
I would say big thing, just depends on the intention of where you see yourself going as an artist, but say you want to be as big as possible, as global as possible. Say it's being true to yourself, building your local fan base as much as possible through collaboration, reaching out to people. And I guess just don't hold yourself back in that way. I think there's a lot of young artists that are sometimes worried about reaching out to artists that are further down the line than them, just because they feel like maybe they're not there yet or in a place yet. Do it anyway. Reach out to people you respect in the scene, and then try as much as possible to build your network outside of the scene too. So on Twitter, on SoundCloud, any remote collaboration, I think, is a great way as well to build a network outside of the scene that you're in, alongside building locally as well.
I think alongside is key there. I think the key is that as you start to branch out further, don't neglect the home audience. No. They're your core. They're the people that will fight for you until the end. As soon as they think that you've gone off to find an audience somewhere else, once your core audience becomes unstable, that's a problem. I think it's like you say, it's about doing both at the same time.
I think for me, authenticity is key, but also understand something that took me a long time to understand as well is timing. Timing is everything. One of the main criticisms I've kind of had is, oh, you're just way too before your time, like people weren't ready for it. So, and I think when it comes to all relationships and life in general, that sometimes, you just need to, if you really want to do music, you have to just keep going, and you have to keep going and going until it feels like you can't do anymore, especially as an independent artist, and then you will probably punch through. And I think lastly, for maybe anybody that's watching at home who's been making music for a long time, so you're not kind of brand new, is just understand that the people that paved the way are usually not recognized. Like the people that go first, doesn't matter what it is in life. Don't feel disheartened if you haven't necessarily been recognized for your contribution. Just keep doing what you do and try to remain authentic as possible.
That's amazing advice.
Means you're a trailblazer. That's what Lotus is saying. Blazing the trail, baby. I just want to kind of remind everybody that's watching that another way to engage as well and to be able to get access to some really good resources and benefits is to join the Scottish Music Industry Association as well. It's another key organization. It's free to join, and it can be really useful to you in order to get benefits and resources, and to be able to push your music further and gain key support, grant support, all that kind of stuff. So please make sure you go and sign up to the Scottish Music Industry Association. But we've run out of time. We could do a whole other hour on this. I know we could very, very, very easily, because time's just flown. I want to thank you all for your participation today. You've given some valuable advice. You've given some very honest and real assessments of some of the things that people will come up against coming from Scotland, as well as some solutions as well as to how to get themselves out there. You can find each of our amazing panelists on their socials. I'm going to let them say what they are if you wanted to hit them up and you know, engage. And outside of that, you know, this conference is happening. Make sure you check out lots of the other panels, because they are all amazing. I know for a fact that the radio one is super dope, because I was in that one too. And yeah, just keep doing the great work that you're doing. Guys, I'm going to leave you with the final word. Each one of you can go around and just one last piece of advice, and please do say your socials for people to contact you on.
Okay, so I've remembered the amazing mentorship for Black women coming into the industry. It's Girls I Rate. So it's at Girls I Rate. They're amazing. It's global. So yeah, check them out. And then yeah, any new artists coming through, please send me new music. I love hearing everything new and fresh. So yeah, my Instagram is at Eve F Chickwe.
So, Lotus.
You want advice on socials?
One piece of advice and a social that somebody can contact you on, if there's somebody out there that's like, I really want to engage with you because you were saying X, Y, Z.
Well, socials is at Lotus_music on Twitter and Instagram. You can also get us on our website, which is lastoftheoldschool.com. And again, I think my last thing I would say is that also as an artist, don't be disheartened if it doesn't happen for you as a teenager or in your 20s, because to be honest, most artists that are truly successful are well into their 30s. And for those artists who are younger, you know, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. So never look at people that have come before you as if they're not important, because without them, you wouldn't be where you are.
Well said. Jay-Z's 50 plus and Beyonce's 40. Let's keep it real. Okay.
My last bit of advice would just be to sort of summarize, I guess, what I said earlier, and that is to really, as an artist, focus on the real people out there that are going to listen to your music and consume your art. Don't worry about the industry. Don't worry about gatekeepers. They're not powerful anymore. Focus on the people that support you and build from that. Build outwards from those people. And my socials, if you Google my name, you'll find them.
Love that. Love that. Put the work in is what that means. Put the work in. Google is your friend. Every answer that you have a question to can be found on Google. I always say that.
It's true.
Cool, man. It's the best form of resource. Thank you all so much for your time today. It's been great. I hope people have got loads from it. We're going to leave it there. I've been Ben. This is Hang, and this was an amazing panel. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.